Meeting number 10 of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We have two sets of witnesses, Christian Leeperk from Department of Political Science at RMC, along with Rick Perrant, both of whom I see on the screen, and from the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the RCMP, Michelle Lahaye, who is the chairperson of that, and I think I saw her on the screen as well. Yes, I do. So with that, I'll ask Christian Leeperk to lead off. The chief issue last time was the muting and unmuting. The incompetence of muting and unmuting was led by the chair, and hopefully with learnings we will get over that. And then the only other thing with the witnesses, particularly not in the case of Christian Leeperk, but in the case of the others, if you when you're making your 7-minute presentation, if you just take a glance at the chair around the 5-minute mark, that's useful. That way I don't have to cut you off, and I don't particularly appreciate cutting people off. So with that, Professor Leeperk, you're up for 7 minutes.
Merci de l'invitation. Merci au comité.
Thank you for the invitation. I will make my presentation in English, but I'll answer questions in both official languages.
So I just want to start with a caveat that I recognize that as a white male tenured professor, I speak to this topic from a privileged position. But as you know, I've written about this issue extensively, and both police governance and the RCMP, and my latest book also deals with public security and federal systems. As background, I don't think there's really any debate when it comes to systemic racism in policing in Canada. Anybody who's read the final report by the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Aboriginal Women and Girls, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's reports, and the CRCC's report into workplace harassment in the RCMP, the evidence is pretty unequivocal. So the real question is, what does this mean and what are the implications? You have the long version of the text with you, and I shall confine myself to a very abbreviated remarks, which focus primarily on the recommendations and the action items. So I'm concerned about the growing gap in civil society between policing and in terms of police civil military relations. And it's ultimately politicians that, of course, set the framework conditions and the constraints for the delivery of police services. And I'm deeply concerned that without concrete and sustained political action and leadership, the gap in terms of police and civil society relations will continue to grow. I would also like to point out that my 2017 study on the RCMP contains a 41-page annex detailing every recommendation made in 15 reports between 2007 and 2017. You will find the annex on the Macdonald-Laurier Institute's website. And the point here is that we don't lack for studies, we don't lack for analysis or diagnosis what the challenges are, but there's a broad consensus on the way forward. In terms of analysis, I would point out that bureaucracies reproduce themselves, and so we have an issue of institutional culture. Second point, that we need systemic use of force statistics for policing across Canada, including the RCMP. I think the recent discussion has shown that better data is certainly an important part of the conversation in terms of identifying the exact challenges. We need to professionalize policing. The Code of Conduct, RCMP says members treat every person with respect and courtesy and do not engage in discrimination or harassment. The public, I think, expects the same sort of professionalism from police as they do from others, from nurses, engineers, lawyers, physicians, and I think they don't see that. I think they're concerned about that. And so I think having more of a service mentality is an important part of the change here. But I think part of what we see is police officers having assimilated a bit of a solipsistic mentality in terms of us versus them. over the course of their careers. And there are ways, I think, to mitigate that. And the fourth point, we need to reduce the propensity for violence. At the same time, I would say our violence is not arbitrary. There is a national use of force framework to which the police chiefs, I'm sure, will be able to comment better than I can. And most of the force that we see, I think, is in accordance with that framework. The recommendations, we need to change the leadership and the management model. People enter the organization and they work their way up through the ranks. And there's very few organizations left like that today in our society. They're usually managed by people who are professional managers and professionals in HR, finance, policy, communications. Now, the RCMP has civilianized these positions. So why not, as witnesses, ask them to testify before the committee? Part of the leadership and management challenge is also, I think, separating the RCMP in the way that D&D and the Canadian Armed Forces are two separate legal entities. Because while that has not eliminated the presence of harassment and racism, it has provided greater bandwidth within those two organizations in terms of dealing with these issues and a better balance between the uniformed and the civilian perspective, something the RCMP desperately needs and that all police services in this country desperately need. We have a challenge in terms of we need to civilianize the delivery of services. As service delivery has expanded for many police forces, we need to make law enforcement organizations more diverse. And the quickest way to do that is to civilianize, because for many of the reasons that you have been discussing, I think minority communities are a bit reticent about joining. We need a better model for public and community safety simply than giving everything to police. And I think police are neither particularly efficient nor effective.
Excuse me, sorry, Professor Reppe. I'm being asked by the translators to slow down just a bit.
Sorry, my habitual problem in testimony.
Is it a habitual problem? Okay.
I shall.
We'll have to give you special training then. Okay. Please continue.
So we need a different service delivery model. We need to return to community policing. Increasingly, we have police, both RCMP, but also many urban services, where members do not live in the communities where they are providing service. The NISCOP's 2019 annual report reviewed inclusion and diversity in the security and intelligence community. That included the RCMP. The review looked at why a diverse and inclusive workforce was so important for the performance of operational success. And it showed that visible minorities were underrepresented in the RCMP, including in the senior ranks. But the report also documents that resistance to diversity and inclusion was strongest among the RCMP's NCO level. And so uniformed members who are on the front lines and middle management. And so the committee should invite the RCMP's new civilian senior human resources official to testify as to what the RCMP is doing to address this challenge. But it's why, if we draw from the ranks for senior management, to some extent, we're replicating the challenges. I document what difference community policing makes, but I think the RCMP needs to become more of a consultant rather than the answer to the challenges that many communities face. And as I've said many times before, the RCMP is too big and has too many roles, which make it difficult, if not impossible, to govern. The RCMP needs to get out of contract policing. We should give the border to CBSA. We should take criminal intelligence out of the RCMP and generate a separate organization so the RCMP can become a genuine federal police force focusing on federal priorities and can be civilian-led. And the Australian Federal Police is a good example because it has always been civilian-led. The RCMP needs separate employer status. It needs a different remuneration system. It needs a completely different training regime. It needs a separate career and professional development framework and path for officers. And we also need a national 311 next generation system to divert non-emergency calls from the 911 system.
Okay, sorry, you finish it up. Do we have to?
I will close on my 4 points on action items. We need to hold middle management accountable. The CAF demonstrates the effect that that can have in terms of curtailing the sort of challenges that we are seeing. the RCMP needs to release results of discipline hearings to the public. There's a ministerial directive on this. The RCMP has not published an annual report since 2017. Commissioner Lucky has been widely reported has 180 civilian review and complaints reports on her desk that date back to 2016. That backlog simply is not acceptable. And so my challenge to you as a committee is you have concrete opportunities to do things here and now. And that is Bill C3 that is currently before Parliament. I detail several challenges that bill currently has. For the sake of time, I will not go through those in detail here, but Bill C3, with the improvements that I lay out, I think can make very clear and concrete change right here, right now.
Okay, I am going to have to cut you off right there, here and now. So I apologize for that, insincerely, of course. But we're going to move to our next witness, Micheline Lahi. You have 7 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. And thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today on the subject.
I'm hearing you as very faint.
Okay. All right, is that better?
Oh, much better.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today on the subject.
Now you need to hold the microphone back from your.
Okay.
Your lip.
Okay. How's that?
That sounds better, I think.
Okay. Perfect. Good. Okay. Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today on the subject of systemic racism in policing services in Canada. The Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the RCMP is an independent body established by Parliament. The Commission makes broad-ranging recommendations regarding policies, procedures, and training with the ultimate goal of improving policing and enhancing RCMP accountability. Greater police accountability is achieved through effective oversight, not only for public complaints, but also through reviews of systemic issues. As the Minister of Public Safety recently indicated to this committee, Indigenous people, Black Canadians, and other racialized people experience systemic racism and disparate outcomes within the criminal justice system. That system includes all police forces, including the RCMP. I must point out the work of the Commission is not immune to the long-term and ongoing effects of systemic racism. For example, it has been reported that there is an overrepresentation of police use of force incidents involving Indigenous and racialized people. However, many of these use of force incidents do not result in a public complaint. So why is that the case? In the Commission's Northern British Columbia investigation, which was undertaken as a follow-up to a Human Rights Watch report, we asked members of Indigenous communities why they do not make use of the complaint system. We found out that many Indigenous people are either unaware of the public complaint process or do not trust it. The process can be excessively bureaucratic and difficult to navigate. However, the Commission has taken some action to improve the accessibility of the public complaint system, including making the public complaint form available in 16 different languages. We most recently worked very closely with the territorial government of Nunavut to ensure that the complaint form and additional materials on the complaints process were available in Inuktitut. Even with these strides, the Commission still needs to do more to ensure greater accessibility, trust, and transparency in the complaints process. Ultimately, my goal is for people to believe that they can file a complaint with the Commission and be treated fairly without fear of reprisal. To achieve that, we need to consult Indigenous and racialized communities to identify and break down the systemic barriers that exist within our current system and implement their suggested changes. We must adopt a regime that better serves all communities. In that regard, the Commission, along with the RCMP, was involved in advancing an informal resolution process put forward by Indigenous leaders. Such projects are key to combating systemic racism and restoring public trust. In terms of the RCMP, I must highlight that the Commission's lens tends to focus on individual allegations of bias, discrimination, or racism. We do not get complaints of systemic racism as a rule. It is only when we take a step back and analyze our findings that the systemic nature of racism becomes apparent. One such area is in the disparity of treatment between Caucasian and Indigenous women detained for public intoxication in northern British Columbia, as noted in the Commission's public interest investigation into policing in that area. In a review of occurrence reports involving the policing of public intoxication, the Commission noted that there were differences in treatment between Indigenous and Caucasian women when it came to detention for public intoxication. 73% of Indigenous women were held in cells until sober. In contrast, 54% of our Caucasian women were held in cells until sober. As well, Indigenous women were 4 times less likely to be taken home rather than lodged in cells as compared to Caucasian women. The Commission is also currently working on a systemic review of the RCMP's bias-free policing model. This review is examining the RCMP's bias-free policing policies and training and assessing the broader application and accountability framework that is in place to ensure that RCMP members adhere to these policies. Accountability and transparency are key to addressing systemic issues and bringing about change. To that end, I would suggest that there is an opportunity to further enhance the oversight regime with Bill C3 and would make the following recommendations to strengthen the bill. First, I recommend statutory timelines for responses to Commission reports to codify the schedule established in the CRCC RCMP MOU. At present, the legislation requires the Commissioner to respond as soon as feasible. Responses to Commission interim reports now take an average of 17 months. One of the Commission's reports has been waiting for a response for over 3.5 years. This is unacceptable in any system where accountability is critical. Second, public education and outreach to Indigenous and racialized communities must become statutory requirements. Bill C3 currently makes public education mandatory for the Commission's new oversight mandate for CBSA, but these activities remain optional under the RCMP Act. The only way that the public complaint process works is if people trust the system. The only way to build that trust is through our outreach efforts. Third, I would like to see both the Commissioner and, once C3 comes into force, the President of the CBSA required to provide an annual report to the Commission outlining the status of implementation of the Commission's recommendations. This would increase the transparency of the complaint system and reassure Canadians that the RCMP and the CBSA are held to a high standard of public accountability. Finally, the Commission needs to be appropriately resourced to conduct systemic reviews. At present, systemic reviews are conducted when sufficient resources are available, but as chairperson, I must constantly make the decision between dealing with complaints from the public and conducting systemic reviews. I do realize, however, that we have our own work to do. We need to dedicate more resources to outreach and public education in Indigenous and racialized communities. We must consult and we must listen. We must become more transparent. We've recently begun to post summaries of public complaint decisions on our website. It is important that the Canadian public be made aware of our work and the recommendations that we make. The Commission must be consulted on any changes to oversight for both the RCMP and changes to Bill C3. With its 35 years of experience in overseeing our national police force, the CRCC is uniquely qualified to provide insight and recommendations to inform decision makers on this critical and pressing issue for Canadians. We are at an opportune time to effect change. Je vous remercie encore de m'avoir invité.
I thank you once more for inviting me today, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
We now move to our 6-minute round, led off by Mr. Palouse, then followed by Mr. Sicken, Madame Michaud, and Mr. Harris. So, Monsieur Palouse, welcome back to the committee. 6 minutes.
Merci, merci, Monsieur le Président. Donnez-moi un instant. Parfait. Ma question.
Thank you. I will start with Ms. Lahaye. At the end of your presentation, you talked of some themes, but I'd like to ask you first how many complaints you receive in a year and what percentage is on race of these complaints are about racism.
Ouvrez votre micro.
Merci beaucoup. En ce moment, on reçoit entre 3 000 et 3 500 plaintes par année. Et d'habitude, on envoie 2 500 à 3
I'm
à
not
3
getting
000.
translation. Sorry, I'm not getting
instant, s'il vous plaît.
translation, Chair.
Oh, sorry. Translation, because I'm not sure how to change to the French piece. So on average, we receive 3,000 to 3,500 complaints per year, and we tend to send about 2,800 of those complaints over to the RCMP. Over the course of the past 5 years, we've received 76 complaints that deal with bias, racism, or discrimination.
Donc, c'est quand même...
I was just asked by one of the members to repeat that last statistic.
We receive, over the course of the last 5 years, we have received 76 complaints that deal with racism, discrimination, or bias.
Okay, thank you. Pierre?
Merci, John. Donc, c'est quand même...
Thank you, John. So this ratio is minor if we look at the total number of complaints. So 76 out of 2,800. It's good. Now, at the commission, you said in your presentation that you receive complaints, you treat them, and that you process them, and then you send them to the RCMC, and then the commissioner has to analyze them and give a response. And you say that this can take 18 months before you get a response, and sometimes you don't receive any response. Can something be done to change this?
To respond in accordance with the legislation. So she must respond to our reports. She must indicate whether she accepts our recommendations. And if she does not accept our recommendations, she has to tell us why. I believe that the solution to this issue is to insert statutory timelines within Bill C3 so that they are required to provide a response within a time that's articulated in the law. We currently have an MOU with the RCMP that articulates those timelines, but they are not statutory.
Parfait. En parlant de C3, justement.
On C3, you made recommendations to improve C3, but were you consulted on the work for C3? Because we're under the impression no one asked you your advice. Did the government ask you for your opinion?
Bill C3 when it was drafted.
Donc, actuellement, on peut considérer actuellement que les...
So we can say that the problems that you're seeing at the RCMP will see the same thing at the border agency. And now we're creating another system, and I think we'll see the same type of problems. Is that what you foresee?
Similar problems with the oversight of the CBSA.
Parfait. Le dernier rapport de votre organisme date qui...
The last public report of your organization on the website is dated 2017. Can you tell us why there were no other reports in the 3 years after that?
What it comes down to is resources, commission resources. When I came in...
Excuse me, Madame Lay. If you don't wear the microphone, it's very hard for the rest of us to hear.
I have it on.
Okay. Now we're hearing you.
Okay, it must be slipping.
Okay.
Okay. For the commission, it comes down to it's a resource issue. So the last when I came into the commission, we had one public interest investigation that was ongoing. That was the investigation that dealt with the RCMP's investigation into the death of Colton Boushey, and that was launched in 2018. That report has now been completed, and it is with the commissioner for response. We also had a backlog of files because In an organization with a relatively small budget, we have to make the decision constantly between dealing with public complaints from Canadian citizens or launching our own larger investigations. And I chose to hire additional staff and prioritize the clearance of our backlog rather than launching additional investigations. I also attributed a large number of internal resources to the Bushi investigation because it was important that it be completed in a reasonable time, and we were able to deliver it to the Commissioner early in 2019.
I think that is going to have to do it for Mr. Paulus. Our incomparable clerk has pointed out to me that your less than incomparable chair has made an error. I had assumed that Mr. Perrant was with Mr. Leaprook at RMC when in fact he is a separate witness. So I'm going to go out of order and ask Mr. Perrant to make his presentation, and I apologize for what is clearly my reading error. Thank you. So unmute yourself first.
Work. Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, now we can hear you.
Good. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the levity at the beginning there. I appreciate that. It eased things up, so it was good. Yeah, just a quick introduction. My name is Rick Perrant. I'm speaking more or less as a police officer. I've been a police officer, been involved in policing for 40 years. So I go back quite a ways to the 1980. And then from policing, I went into the academic world, finishing up as an associate professor at Simon Fraser University School of Criminology. So much like Christian, I've done a lot of research. I continue to research, publish, and I think Canada has a great policing system. We're quick to criticize it. I would argue that Canada has one of the better police services in the world, probably in the top 5, if not the top 10. I think one of our problems is we tend to compare ourselves to the United States, and we tend to use a lot of US data and a lot of US issues in interpreting what our Canadian society and Canadian policing is. And I look back and I would say there was a shift in policing for the good to some degree in the mid-1980s when Canadian policing again took on many of the things that this committee is looking at, whether racism, whether hiring minorities, using polygraphs today in the system, background checks, vetting racist attitudes before they even get into the system, working with the LGBT community, hiring women, visible minorities within the organizations. I would argue that Canadian policing has done a lot in the last 25 years to put it as one of the top institutions within Canada. Having said that, yes, you're correct. We know it's not perfect. There's a lot more work that can be done, and I think that's where the committee has a great potential to leverage the changing world. Ironically, what I find that also in the mid-1990s, I saw that policing somewhat got hijacked by a US mandate. Again, here in Vancouver, I saw tasers coming in 1999 with the Victoria Police Department because we thought that was the best way to go, follow our American brothers and sisters and implement what they do in the US because everything in the US is better. Well, I would argue against that. And what I've seen over the years is that more and more Canadian policing has taken on a culture of use of force, focusing on enforcement, and has gone away from the service and the safety issues that they traditionally had up until the mid-1990s. So I've personally seen a shift in the last 25 years, and this bears out in the research when we look at Mr. Jakanski and the YVR incident, how policing has become more bureaucratic. And I also, I agree with many of the things Christian has brought up, that agencies like the RCMP are way too spread, doing too many things and not doing them well, like all of us would be. If any human being tried to do all the things the RCMP does and continues to take on, you only drop balls, and that's basically what's happening. And one of the other problems I find is that in Canada, we lack a central agency in Ottawa that overlooks policing. So if you are a civilian or a activist, there is no data for Canadian policing. You have to either go to one of the 200 departments and try to obtain that data. And as we've heard, it doesn't come very easily, even when it's legislated. And again, we tend to look at the United States. So there's a lack of transparency in Canada. There's a lack of Canadian data. There's a lack of civilian involvement, and there should be more of that, is what I would argue. And we need to get back to where we were 25 years ago, in the sense of becoming a service that the public phones up, like we do with the fire department. Even though they don't fight a lot of fires, we know that firemen will take on a lot of tasks to help the public. And I think that's where we need to go with Canadian policing, back to our roots that traditionally we've had. And one of the examples I'm quick to bring up is police shootings. In the United States, they occur at 5 to 6 times the more frequency than they do in Canada. But most Canadians don't know that. Canadians spend probably 60% of their time watching American news. We can tell you all about Trump. We can tell you all about what's going on in the United States, but we know very little about what goes on in Canada. And again, I blame Canadian policing for that. We need to be more transparent. We need to have better data. And I would argue that we need a central agency in Ottawa that looks at Canadian policing, that looks at again, as we've heard, oversight run by civilians to shape policing so that it stays on track and that it does continue to have the diversity and the good things that are so common to Canadian policing, building trust and building values within our system, relationships with the public, and focus on ethics. We sometimes forget about ethics as another aspect. I think if we have ethical policing as the steering us along with relationships with the public, I think that's where we're going to go into this positive realm. But what we've done is we've focused on U.S. policing, and we've tend to focus on use of force. And again, this is systematic within police agencies all across Canada. And again, the theme of militarization, more guns, more weapons, more tactics. We need that, but it shouldn't be the driving force. Service and safety should be the #1 factor that police should be hired upon and we should train upon. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And I again apologize for not realizing that you weren't part of the RMC presentation. With that, we'll return to the list. Next up is Mr. Sicken. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is going to be for Ms. Lahi. Whenever we talk about civilian oversight, I do like to preface my comments with actually not too different from what Mr. Perrant said. By and large, our system is good. Our law enforcement officers are good, but you can always make the system more efficient and have it work better for Canadians. So having said that, I noticed that before once that you attended SECU last year, you talked about the lengthy time it can take to review public complaints, noting that it can sometimes take years for reports to be finalized. How beneficial would it be to establish a baseline for time limits for the RCMP to respond, and what would be the best course of action, in your opinion?
Thank you very much for your question. From the Commission's perspective, it would be extremely beneficial for baseline timelines to be established. That's one of the reasons why in December, Commissioner Lucky and I signed an MOU between the CRCC and the RCMP that did establish those timelines. And a copy of that MOU is posted on the Commission's website. However, the MOU is not binding. So if parliamentarians could establish solid timelines, statutory timelines within the Act, it would be extremely beneficial. Canadians who have made complaints will get responses to their complaints in a timely fashion, and that increases accountability exponentially.
Thank you. And speaking of accountability, we've heard that the CRCC isn't regulated, that it has a lack of representation from the actually affected communities. Surely amongst recent international discussion on policing, this has probably become more pronounced. And in your opinion, should we be expanding participation to those affected populations? And how do you think we should go about that? In
my opinion, the Commission can only benefit by having a greater diversity. One of the things that we are doing internally is we're setting up our own internal diversity and equity committee to look at inclusion and to ensure that we're looking at diverse opinions from across the organization. Internally, we are a diverse organization, but we do not have a significant Indigenous representation, and I believe that is something that needs to be made, that we need to correct internally, so that we're providing a better lens on the issues that we deal with on such a regular basis.
Thank you. And my final question for you, your predecessor also noticed that the CRCC has the expertise to deal not only with the public complaints, but also to undertake systemic reviews and investigations into the RCMP. You recently published a review of the service's use of force. How do you foresee improvements involving wellness calls and de-escalation?
In terms of wellness calls and de-escalation, there's two things that really need to be looked at. The first thing that is critical is training. Police officers need to be better trained to be able to handle those particular situations. That means no longer taking a command and control approach, as I indicated in my statement, and looking towards a greater de-escalation. So that is the most important thing. The second thing is that there needs to be greater efforts made on the part of provincial and territorial governments to provide greater mental health, and so that police forces can, when it's required, they can work with individuals so that de-escalation is made more possible for individuals that are in crisis.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
You have just over 2 minutes.
Over 2 minutes. Thank you.
Now under 2 minutes.
My next question will be for Christian. Through your extensive studies on the subject, you've arrived at the conclusion that the RCMP is in need of significant structural change in order to bring about the necessary professionalization of the force and deliver the level of service that Canadians should expect from them. Some of your recommendations have included remuneration based on skills rather than seniority, civilianizing the management and senior leadership of the RCMP rather than promoting through the ranks, and requiring higher levels of education and training from officers. However, the RCMP police union, the NPF, is strongly opposed to these recommendations in favor of the status quo. While the head of the NPF, Mr. Brian Suave, is due to testify at this committee later today, what would you say to the NPF and its membership to change their minds?
That's an extraordinarily complicated question, and you have a minute to answer it. So I'll let it go. I don't want to interrupt you again.
The chair is putting me on notice, so I'll keep it very brief. That I think ultimately we need to work with the police associations and the police unions. They represent the frontline members that are doing a very difficult job, and by and large, a very good and professional job. At the same time, I think ultimately my recommendations reflect broader structural issues, and the insanity that we have is we keep on picking new police chiefs and new commissioners, and we hope we're going to get all this fantastic change. And we've played this game over and over, and we keep reproducing the same results. And so I would urge the committee to look at some of the broader structural issues and to work with the RCMP's new association/union to try to effect structural change that gets improved outcomes for the communities that are served, for the members within the RCMP that have to perform a very difficult and challenging task, and for the federal government that ultimately owns the police service.
Thank you, Mr. Second. Madame Michaud, 6 minutes. 6 minutes.
Madame Michaud, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to start with Mr. Luprecht. Thank you for sharing your testimony. And there was one sentence that really struck me. You said that when the police is the only form of authority in a community, it quickly becomes the enemy. And yesterday, Mr. McCaffrey, a police chief, told us that in many First Nations language, police means those who take away from us. And that harkens back to the colonialist history of Canada and the Indian residential schools. And in the communities where they work, they changed the word and it means those who help. So I think these small gestures can really change prejudice or the perception that they have. What other gestures do you think could be made to change mindsets and to avoid falling into an adversarial relationship rather than a more one of assistance?
Small communities that are policed by the RCMP, and apologies for answering in English, it's because of the translation issues. The RCMP is often the only federal presence in those communities, and in some cases, it is the only governmental presence from outside that community, often dealing with very considerable challenges. And so I think it is no surprise that that one presence then becomes seen in an adversarial fashion, and that some of the members, certainly not all, I would say minority, internalizes that and as an us and them mentality. And so I think there are two important components to this. One is that this reflects a broader failure of educational, health, social services, economic development within those communities, where the RCMP ends up picking up the pieces. And so we need to return to a more holistic approach to community policing and to community safety. At the same time, as the chairperson of the CRCC has pointed out, I think there are serious challenges, and as the data with regards to use of force towards Indigenous and minority people by the RCMP in particular bears out, there are particular structural issues within the RCMP, and I would say those start with DEPO, which is a socialization organization and socializes a certain type of command and control mindset. And so starting with a complete overhaul of the curriculum and the training regime at DEPO would, I think, also affect change. I'll leave it. Many of the other recommendations I've already detailed in my submission.
Merci. Thank you. You proposed a full overhaul of the current model at the RCMP, and you made a number of recommendations, but you didn't have time to explain them in depth. Could you please tell us which recommendation is the most urgent? Where should we start when we need to do a complete overhaul and we need to start from zero? Where do we start to rework the RCMP's model?
Unity for the committee and the RCMP in the short term to affect immediate change is the recommendation to hold middle management accountable. And there are many instances to which the chairperson will also be able to testify where I am puzzled that an organization that since 2003 has clearly messaged that harassment is unacceptable, middle management did not step up, and the public issues that we see reflect those. And I would say holding the sergeant, staff sergeant level accountable for incidents of harassment or inappropriate, potentially inappropriate use of force is critical to change, because middle managers will simply either ignore the problem until they're posted out and someone else can pick up the piece, or they will try to pass off the problem onto someone else. And so having them own that problem and making them responsible and consequences for middle management for not acting, that is what the Canadian Armed Forces has done with regards to racism and with regards to harassment. And I think it has shown to produce certainly positive results within the organization. No legislative change is required, simply a clear signaling by the political authority to the commissioner about what is going to be expected from here on in for middle management and what the consequences are for middle management not to act.
You have about 30 seconds left.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will come back to Madame Lahaye. It's a complicated question. It's a bit difficult to follow within simultaneous interpretation, so I think I'll wait to my next turn to ask this question.
Mr. Harris, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to say that my observation from the evidence today, and Professor Luprecht and both other witnesses, that we have a system where Professor Luprecht pointed out, 41 pages of recommendations going back to 2007. Ms. Lahaye talked about recommendations being made, sent to the commissioner. After a while, we'll know whether they're accepted or not, but we don't know. And I think Commissioner Lahaye, you would say that you don't really have an effective way of finding out whether the recommendations have been followed or not, as evidenced by your Northern BC situation. What are we dealing with here? Is it true that the oversight by the Civilian Review Board that you're heading, the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission, is that an effective model? We've heard suggestions that the RCMP as an institution is broken. Is the oversight that's conducted by your organization, is that broken yet in a way that can't be fixed by your suggestions, or do we have to look further than that? I have a problem here with all these complaints, lots of recommendations, but no follow through, and apparently the same issues that we're dealing with now.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Harris. I would point out to you that the Commission's authorities are the same authorities as you would have with a Commission of Inquiry. So what that means is that we have the authority to make findings and recommendations. Those findings and recommendations are then sent to the Commissioner, and she is required to respond to our reports. And in her responses, she is required to indicate whether she accepts our recommendations or not. And if she does not accept our recommendations, she has to indicate why she does not accept those recommendations. The second portion of that, and as you point out, and it is one of my recommendations going forward, is that the Commissioner should be required to provide a letter to the Commission on a yearly basis that indicates the status of the implementation of the recommendations that she has accepted. So by putting in statutory timelines into the Act that mean that she must respond to public complaints in a timely fashion, and as well by putting into the Act a requirement for an annual report on the status of the implementation of those recommendations, it will certainly strengthen our oversight role, and it will strengthen the accountability of the RCMP.
But you've also suggested in your statement of July 21st that over the past 4 years, you've issued 14 reports concerning individual cases where RCMP actions in a wellness check or a person in crisis was unreasonable. And you reference other reports going back to 2009, 2014, 2016, saying the same kind of thing that you did in terms of the RCMP approach. You issue this statement on the 21st. Obviously, you're not satisfied that there's been a response. So your recommendations going back several years, 4 years, and these other recommendations going back to 2009 don't seem to be having the effect that they should. What do you think can be done about that?
By having the Commissioner report on the status of the implementation of those recommendations, then that's going to increase the accountability. Right now, what's happening is many of those reports are awaiting a response. And the reason why I chose at the Commission to release a public statement is because we were dissatisfied effectively with the fact that recommendations have been made over and over again with respect to wellness checks, and the RCMP does not appear to be listening. And so we issued that statement because I felt that it was in the public interest for that information to be made available. We increase accountability by imposing timelines for responses to these reports and by requiring the Commissioner to indicate the status of the implementation of our recommendations.
Madam, who initiated the MOU with the RCMP that resulted in the MOU last December? Was that the Commission or was that the RCMP?
I would say that it was something that we came to jointly. Both organizations realized that there would be value in us having an MOU. The Commission has existed for almost 35 years. We've never had an MOU with the RCMP, although it has been in the legislation. And we felt that it was time to move forward with respect to putting an MOU in place. So it was the first step in starting to impose timelines so that we could get more timely responses to Canadians with respect to their complaints.
You have about a minute, Mr. Harris.
Thank you. It's been suggested that having an Indigenous person as a fellow commissioner along with you would be of value, and that you should be able to or should be using Indigenous people as part of your investigating team. Is that the case now with respect to investigations? And would you think there would be a value in having that and perhaps having a little more authority beyond recommendations?
I believe that there would be value in having a member of the commission that is Indigenous. We're called members, not commissioners, just to clarify. And I also believe that, yes, we would be strengthened by having Indigenous investigators. Having said that, my investigative team at the commission is quite diverse, but we do need to move forward with having a greater Indigenous footprint here at the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Morrison, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the witnesses today. It's really been a great conversation so far. My first question is going to be to Dr. Parent. I know you were involved in recruiting into JI at the Justice Institute, and I wonder if you were comparing that or if you've been to Depot. And I guess the question is we talk a lot about training if the RCMP and municipal police forces are trained effective levels. Should there be more training? Should there be changed? So I'm just wondering, with your experience, if you can elaborate a bit on the difference in training, or if you feel that 6 months is enough for the RCMP and the municipal. They're a bit different, but maybe just some of your expertise.
I think that training is very similar. I would argue that there should be more of this customer service, client-oriented focus for the recruits. But in fairness to the RCMP, they have a tough go. Once they leave Depot, they're posted somewhere in Canada, and typically they're running short. That's a constant theme in the RCMP. And I think while the training is good in Depot and very comparable to other police academies, whether it's in Ontario, Quebec, or in British Columbia, I think where the RCMP need more direction or more assistance is once the recruit is deployed in the field, because often the recruit will leave Depot and they will go to northern Saskatchewan or northern British Columbia. And often they are, and again, I know many of these people, I've been out there with them, they will have a matter of days, maybe a week or two with another officer. But basically they're flying by the seat of their pants when they get out into these areas. And all they can draw upon is the 6 months training they've had and whatever life skills they've had in the past. And we tend to hire young people. And a lot of the young people come from university backgrounds or academic backgrounds, which is nice. But again, they lack a lot of the people skills. And what we used to term as common sense is not that common anymore. So when we're dealing with complex problems with different cultures, diversity, they may or may not have those skill sets and abilities. And I think
I did actually brought this up with the commissioner about hiring locally. In other words, hiring provincially, territorial. So you get people who actually want to go to those small communities versus some who may be looking for the bigger centers. So for example, in Delta, they hire for people to stay in Delta, but in the RCMP, they're going to go all over. So maybe a part of a solution would be to hire locally. Therefore, people want to be in that area.
I totally agree with you. I think that's one of the biggest problems that could easily be fixed with the RCMP is that they have this model. I know here in Vancouver, where many of the recruits, friends, students of mine will come from the Vancouver area and they want to work in the Vancouver area with the RCMP, but they wind up in northern Saskatchewan. So they quit after 18 months or 2 years and join a municipal police, which again results in the shortfall of RCMP officers. So the RCMP has a model that needs to be fixed. And I agree with Christian, there's a lot of ways to fix it without spending a lot of money or without making a lot of big changes, but you need some civilian influence. And I think the problem is most of the influence of the RCMP is internal, and it doesn't get any better as time goes on. And I think that's yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Madame Cara, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start off with thanks again for everyone for being here again. I'll start off with Ms. Lahai. Ms. Lahai, can you please clarify for me again the number of complaints that you get and how many you get based on race and discrimination?
So the number of complaints that we receive on a yearly basis is between 3,000 and 3,500. One of our allegation categories, the categories that we have of allegations do not include discrimination or racism, but I can tell you that over the course of the last 5 years, we've received 76 complaints that deal with racism, bias, or discrimination.
I mean, that number is quite low. I mean, if you compare that to the realities and especially the reality of the racialized communities and perhaps the testimonies that we've been hearing, how are you tracking that they're based on racism or discrimination?
It's we're tracking it because the individuals actually indicate that they believe that they've been discriminated against based upon race or culture or religion. So the individuals actually come out and oftentimes it'll be complaints with respect to officer conduct, perhaps a negative attitude, and the individuals will frame it by stating that they believe that they've been discriminated against based upon race.
But can you just clarify, you know, given that there's a clear differential of results of racialized people, I hope you're not concluding that since there's a low number of complaints based on racism that there is little or no systemic racism within the RCMP?
No, I'm not at all making that conclusion. And as I indicated in my remarks, one of the things that the Commission has noted is that Indigenous people do not make use of the public complaint system. And that is an issue for us that we need to work on. The best way to work on that is through better public education and better outreach. And the only way that we get to that place is through increased resources and a statutory requirement to perform those activities.
Thank you. And Ms. Lahai, would you say that CRCC is a representative of the communities that it serves? You know, could you kind of provide us that oversight of how many, you know, women, Black, Indigenous, and racialized Canadians sit at the Commission?
I'll be able to provide you those statistics afterwards. I don't have them at my fingertips right now. I can tell you that the Commission is very diverse in terms of gender balance. We're approximately 55% women, as a matter of fact, here at the Commission, and we do have a very diverse population here at the Commission. But I can provide you those specific statistics afterwards.
Okay,
we'll send them to you.
We'll have to leave it there. Mr. Upo, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you to all the witnesses. Professor Luprat, the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians in 2019 has an annual report reviewed inclusion and diversity in the RCMP. And the report statistics showed that visible minorities were underrepresented in the RCMP, including the senior ranks. Can you elaborate on this?
I think it demonstrates the value of having independent review of organizations by parliamentarians as a way. So the changes that the government has put in place in terms of the NISCOP, and I think it's a very important report for everyone to read, as you point out. It is the first independent, I think, a triangulation of representation within the force, and it strengthens my case for the challenge of drawing from the ranks in the senior representation of management. And I think part of the previous conversation also suggested that there are good reasons why many minority communities may not be particularly interested in joining the uniformed ranks of the RCMP, but they may be much more interested in joining the civilian ranks. And so if we want to have a more representative RCMP, civilianization is an important step in that direction.
Thank you. Next question is for Chairperson Leahy. You mentioned about the diversity in the Commission, that it is very diverse. But do these members also have a broad experience in policing?
the commission right now, in terms of policing, we do have some staff members that are former police officers, but I must point out that our role is we are civilian oversight, and we take that very seriously. So the most important thing is, from a staff perspective, is that the staff of the commission needs to have a diverse and broad range of experiences coming from very different areas. For example, if I look at my investigative team, I have some of my investigators that are former police officers, but I have some that come from more of a social background, and so that really provides us a diverse experience here, and it provides us a very diverse lens on the investigations that we do.
Okay.
About 30 seconds.
My next question is going to take too long, so I'll wait.
Okay, thank you. Madame Damov, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all your witnesses for being with us today. I just want to start by getting something on the record that the fact is the overrepresentation of Black Canadians and Indigenous peoples in the criminal justice system in Canada is just as bad as in the United States. In terms of people who've been shot by the police, we've had 30 people in Canada who've been killed between January and June. 3 Indigenous people were killed in 3 days in Winnipeg. And to say that Canada isn't as bad as the dumpster fire in the United States does a disservice to those who've been killed and their families. So I just wanted to get that on the record. Ms. LaHaye, my questions are actually for you, or I'm starting with you. I've looked at the flow chart on your website about how to file a complaint, and I've had conversations with Dr. Alan Benson, who you probably know, about the process. And he has indicated that the process is so difficult that many people have to hire a lawyer in order to file a complaint with the RCMP. So as a result, many Indigenous people who have experienced racism and discrimination actually never file a complaint. So I applaud the work you've done in translating into other languages, but I'm just wondering if you've considered simplifying the application process so that it's easier for individuals to file those complaints.
We have. Thank you for your question. Yes, as you pointed out, we have done translation into many different languages. The best way that we can make the system more accessible is through increased public education and outreach. You are correct that when you look at that flow chart on our website, it can be highly confusing, but we've simplified the complaint form a great deal over the course of the past few years. And as well, we have intake officers. So if individuals choose to make a complaint with respect to the RCMP, we have a phone number, we have an email address. They can reach out, and we have very, very well-trained staff that can talk people through the process and explain to them exactly how it's going to work.
So would you consider putting together a group such as from Indigenous peoples, Black Canadians, other racialized Canadians, to be part of a review of that process? Because if Dr. Benson is hearing, who's on the ground, is hearing that it's difficult to apply, I'm just wondering, so often we exclude people as government because I don't think education solves the problem. And if you don't trust the RCMP and you don't trust the institution, you probably won't come forward. So I put that out there for your consideration.
I think that your idea is an idea that's definitely worthy of consideration. There's no doubt that we need to do greater consultation. But the other thing that I need to highlight as well is that our process is a remedial process. So really the focus is on identifying issues with policies, procedures, and training, and ensuring that if any officers are found to have had conduct issues, we make recommendations for operational guidance. So the process is remedial in fashion, but yes, I like your idea, and it is certainly something that I will take into consideration.
Thank you, Madame Damov. Madame Michaud, minute and a half.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais m'adresser à...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Ms. LaHaye. For people who want to complain, I'm continuing on what Ms. Damov said. You said there were many languages, 16 languages on the website, including 3 Indigenous languages. 3 Indigenous languages, but there are many Indigenous languages. And For the complaint online, it's only in French and English. So earlier you said that there were 76 complaints based on discrimination and racism in the past years. Don't you think that if you can't access a form or the process in your mother tongue, this could prevent people from lodging a complaint? You're saying that there's a phone number where information can be given out, but are people trained? Do you have translators who can help people? Because I think that this can be an obstacle to lodging a complaint for one who is a victim of discrimination.
You have agreements in place with the Translation Bureau where we can, if an individual wishes to make a complaint, but we do not have access to their own mother tongue, then we do three-way calls with the Translation Bureau between our intake officer and the individual that is making the complaint. So we have done that in the past. We will continue to do that as well. The Commission is always open to producing other complaint forms in other languages. We've done it in the past, and we can do it again in the future. The languages that have been chosen.
We're going to. Sorry, Madame Michaud has a minute and a half, and it's very brief period of time. With that, Mr. Harris, final minute and a half.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Lahi, what would happen if someone made a complaint of excessive use of force? There was an Indigenous person, but didn't mention or complain that it was because I was Indigenous. Would that be treated as a racially based complaint or no?
We don't have a category that's for racially based complaints, but we do routinely make findings and recommendations in our reports that speak to the importance of cultural sensitivity.
I understand that. You counted 76. So if I made a complaint as an Indigenous person, but I didn't say the use of force was because I was Indigenous, then that's not considered one of your 76 complaints.
No, it is not, but it doesn't mean that we wouldn't address the issue.
No. I just want to I'm trying to understand the statistics. Can you tell me why you don't publish your reports and recommendations, except in the case of public interest matters? Because you could easily allow the public to see what the recommendations were, what the facts were, without disclosing privacy.
Yes, you're correct. So the Privacy Act is the main reason why we do not do that. But if you go to our website, you will notice that we have begun to publish summaries of the complaints that we have, and we are going to continue doing that going forward to increase the transparency.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Harris. That brings to the end of our time with this panel. Normally, the chair doesn't intervene in questions, but Madame Damoff made an opening statement about comparability between U.S. and Canadian interactions with citizens, which I thought was directed at the witness, Mr. Parent. I think there would be a benefit to the committee to at least hear your response to Madame Damoff's initial statement.
Briefly, I'm well aware of that statistic, and I would say that there's a big difference between what the media reports and what actually happens. And I'm well aware of CBC, how they put those stats together and how they use, I would argue, a sensationalism, and they don't put the actual context that occurs. And they don't do a concluding statement at the end of the year. If you look at the facts are very different. And I have those facts, and I've pulled all those files personally that I talk about. So I think there's a difference between the media and what actually happens with Stats Canada.
Okay, I think.
Chair, with all due respect, those comments did not come from the media. They came from a briefing I had from the Government of Canada, and I wasn't talking about police killings. I was talking about the overrepresentation in the criminal justice system. So I wasn't taking it from the media.
I knew I shouldn't have opened this up.
Oh, my discussion.
Well, that is the point of a parliamentary committee, is to have points of view, often different points of view, fleshed out. It may be useful that you and Madame Damoff go offline and have a direct conversation, so that there may be a point of reconciliation between what appears to be quite divergent statements. So with that, I'm going to suspend. I want to thank, on behalf of the committee, each and every witness here. this has been a very stimulating and useful discussion. So with that, we are suspended. Meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security, pursuant to a Standing Order 1082, which is a systemic racism in policing policing services in Canada. We have with us for this panel from the Ottawa Police Service, Peter Stollery, the Chief, Dale McAfee, Edmonton Police Service, who is also the Chief, and the Canadian Police Association, Tom Stamatakis, who's the President. The order of speaking for the time being will be Chief from Ottawa, Peter Stollery. Second will be Tom Stamatakis, Canada Police Association, and thirdly, Chief McPhee. So with that, I'll ask Chief Stollery to proceed with your 7-minute presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to participate in this very important discussion. My name is Peter Stollery, and I'm the Chief of the Ottawa Police Service. I'm proud to serve the 1 million souls who reside in the nation's capital. I'm proud of my 28 years as a police officer in Canada. I'm a proud Black man, a proud native of Jamaica, and a proud Canadian citizen. I will start by unequivocally stating that Canada is the best country in the world, that the Canadian policing model is the best in the world, and that Canadian police officers are among the finest people in the world. I will also unequivocally state that individual and systemic racism exists in Canadian policing, in all Canadian institutions, and in Canadian society as a whole. These statements are not mutually exclusive. The ongoing negative impact of systemic racism is eroding the public's trust and confidence in policing, which is essential to keeping our communities safe. Not addressing systemic racism is not only failing our communities, it also puts our own police service members at risk. Systemic racism is a well-established concept rooted in our colonial past, embedded in our legislation, enabled in our institutional practices, and sustained in our organizational culture. A common misconception about systemic racism is that it involves a few bad apples who engage in racist thoughts and behaviors. This is not true because imperfectly good people can commit acts of omission that allow individual racists to survive and even thrive in organizations. Imperfectly good people can also consciously or unconsciously enable systems to create and perpetuate policies and practices that work to the advantage of some groups and to the disadvantage of others. Systemic racism exists within all Canadian institutions. Further, these institutions are interdependent, interactive, and compounding on each other. For example, individual and systemic racism in education, healthcare, social services, and housing will directly contribute to the underpinning elements of crime. Criminal activity will eventually engage the justice system into this cascading set of institutional failures. To dismantle systemic racism, along with all forms of discrimination in policing, we need to make positive investments in police culture, police operations, and the broader institutional ecosystem that police operate in. Changing police culture is not something that can happen overnight. However, there are specific steps that police leaders can do today that will build a healthier police culture for the future. For example, a greater critical mass of diverse sworn and civilian personnel at every level of the police service has been shown to diminish some of the more pernicious aspects of police culture. That is why the Ottawa Police Service has enhanced our recruitment, hiring, and promotion processes to increase the quality of our members and to accelerate the diversification of our organization. Human rights experts have helped to identify the following 3 things that police services should do to build a healthier culture and eliminate systemic racism. First, collecting and analyzing disaggregated race-based data. Second, developing an equity, diversity, and inclusion toolkit to review and update all policies, procedures, and practices. And third, identifying, removing all aspects of the organizational culture that sustains systemic racism or resists attempts to dismantle it. The Ontario Human Rights Code and the Comprehensive Police Service Act of Ontario establish the responsibilities for police services, police boards, and police oversight bodies to prevent and address both individual and systemic racism. There is a further positive obligation on police services to make sure that they are not engaging in systemic discrimination of any form. All Ontario Police Services must comply with these legislative requirements and standards. That said, Canadian police leaders must go well beyond mere legal compliance. We must demonstrate our own personal and professional commitment to promoting and protecting human rights and charter rights. We must take the initiative to lead the redevelopment of all core systems, human resources, professional standards, corporate risk management, operations, IT, such that these systems accelerate the advancements that we have already made to bring greater levels of diversity, equity, and inclusion into policing, while also dismantling systemic racism that has too long persisted in policing. The community do not want law enforcement or the use of force to be the dominant problem-solving tools of policing, nor do they want law enforcement to be the dominant factor shaping police culture. These concerns help to explain why Indigenous, Black, and racialized communities sometimes feel they are over-policed, underserved, and overrepresented in the criminal justice system. The community and police do not want to be the only or even primary response option to every call for service everywhere on a 24/7, 365 basis. This model does not fully serve the community's needs, and it puts police officers in the untenable position where they do not and cannot have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to consistently and successfully deal with non-police related calls, most notably with people suffering from mental health or addictions. The public and police members want policing that prevents and reduces crime. They also want police to partner with the community to address a wider variety of public safety issues: neighbor disputes, parking complaints, road safety, school safety, disorderly behavior in public areas, as well as other human services issues where the police would play more of a support role, but not the lead role that we currently do. That is why the Ottawa Police Service is committed to making major investments in the following three operational strategies. First, neighborhood policing. Deploying officers into neighborhoods experiencing higher calls for service, criminality, and/or social disorder, where they work with local community stakeholders to prevent and address a broad range of community safety and well-being issues. Second, intelligence-led policing. Enhancing the intelligence-led policing model that will still have crime reduction as a priority, but be fully aligned with the neighborhood policing model to prevent crime and disorder while getting at the root causes of crime. Third, community safety and well-being. Implementing a community safety and well-being plan that brings together the police, education, healthcare, social services, along with community stakeholders to create an integrated service delivery model that proactively assesses individual and community needs and the risks associated to them and addresses them in the pre-justice space using a combination of social workers, mental health practitioners, and/or police officers. The best way to prevent crime is by addressing the root causes of crime in full partnership with the community. We can do this while still demonstrating the ability to deal with the most prolific criminal offenders. Simply put, the police should prevent first and foremost, enforce last and least, while partnering in all ways and always. This will enable the co-production of public safety and the co-destruction of systemic racism. I know that my colleague, Chief Dale McPhee, will focus the majority of his presentation on the types of changes needed to further align and integrate the larger ecosystem of institutions that the police operate in. This is an area where I think we can make the biggest and most impactful and most needed changes. Changes that will save the lives of community members and police service members. Changes that will provide greater dignity and respect to minority community members and to police service members. Changes that will rebuild public trust and police morale. Changes that will result in a massive return on investment for taxpayers and an opportunity for further investments in community safety and well-being for all Canadians in all communities. In conclusion, I am proud of the progress that has been made in my chosen profession of policing. I am proud of the Ottawa Police Service members for their contributions to that progress. I am proud of all members of Canada's police services who have contributed to advancing our social fabric, our democracy, and our nation. Much has been accomplished, but much more needs to be done. I am personally and professionally committed to fixing this issue. Thankfully, I'm not alone in this work. I'm surrounded by a critical mass of other leaders in the Ottawa Police Service and across this great country. Leaders who know that this is not the time for resisting change. This is not the time for incremental change. This is the time to make real change. Policing in Canada has been moving from denial and resistance to listening, dialoguing, learning, owning, partnering, co-designing, and co-producing the cultural, operational and system-wide changes we need to dismantle systemic racism in policing and in the wider Canadian society. The conditions to make meaningful change exist right here and right now in Canada. There are no more excuses. Indigenous, Black, and racialized communities need this. Women and newcomers need this. Frontline police officers and police chiefs need this. All Canadians. Thank you.
Chief, slowly you're fading, or something's fading here, but you're clearly out of time.
Concluded. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, it's good. I just encourage witnesses to look occasionally at the chair. I don't wish to interrupt. So our next speaker is President Tom Stamtakas. You have 7 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to participate today as you continue your important study into systemic racism in policing services in Canada. I note there are some new faces at the table since my last appearance, so very briefly, for those who may not be familiar, I'm appearing today as the president of the Canadian Police Association, which is the largest policing advocacy organization in Canada and represents over 55,000 frontline civilian and sworn law enforcement personnel from coast to coast to coast. Our members are the officers and the communications professionals that members of the public see in their communities, and usually the first line of contact people have with their local police service. As you can imagine, I've been following the proceedings of this committee very closely, and I think it's important to begin my presentation today by acknowledging the very real issue of systemic racism in our institutions. I also think it's important to acknowledge that this is not a problem that is unique to policing in Canada. The effects of systemic racism are apparent in many of our central institutions, from the media to academia to the legal system, our healthcare system, and even our parliament and provincial legislatures. We need to do better, and that statement goes beyond just having witnesses appear and provide what they believe are the best definitions of systemic racism. From my perspective, whether or not my own specific definition of the problem matches any other witnesses is largely unimportant. The key is that it has become abundantly clear in the past 2 months is that there are some Canadians who do not believe their police services represent them or treat them equally based on the color of their skin or their circumstances. And as police professionals, we need to address that. That being said, I also think it's unfortunate that all police officers have been broadly targeted, both by activists and some political figures, as being the ultimate source of the problem. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I've had the privilege of working in policing for over 30 years myself, and by virtue of my role as an operational police officer and as a president of the CPA, representing police officers locally, provincially, federally, and internationally, I've had the ability to meet with officers and police services across this country. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that Canadians have every reason to be proud of the professionalism and dedication that is shown by our personnel on a daily basis. According to Statistics Canada in 2017 and 18, Canadian police officers responded to almost 13 million calls for service. To put it another way, in the first 6 months of 2020, the Edmonton Police Service responded to 87,724 calls for service, which averages out to 20 calls per hour, 7 days per week, 24 hours per day. And these numbers only reflect specific calls for service. It doesn't even begin to capture proactive police work such as traffic enforcement, community outreach, or targeted policing at identified hotspots. I mention this to highlight the fact that there are overwhelming demands being placed on the men and women who make up our police services. And the overwhelming majority of these calls and activities are handled without fanfare, with outstanding professionalism, and without use of force. We carefully recruit and carefully screen our officers and then provide them with outstanding training in areas such as de-escalation, and it shows in these statistics. I think it's important for all of us to keep in mind that it's entirely possible to recognize the strong work already being done by our police services, while also acknowledging that there's more to be done and there's room for improvement within our sector. One of the remedies that's been suggested to address systemic racism in policing is the idea that it's time to abolish police or defund policing. I'd like to take just a minute to respond to that idea. The term defund the police is open to interpretation. For some, it's merely a hashtag. For others, it has many definitions. Abolish the police, reduce police budgets, reallocate police funds to social services, or a move towards a social work model, which is to replace police officers with trained social workers or specialized response teams. While there's universal acceptance of the need for reforms, arbitrary cuts to police funding are not the answer. Proposals to cut budgets by 10% to 20%, for example, have been put forward with no plan on replacing the services currently delivered by the police. Also missing from the discussion is whether other health or social agencies can take on the added responsibilities. I'd also note that if these cuts were to be imposed without an appropriate replacement plan in place, it will be the most vulnerable and marginalized Canadians that will feel the effects most acutely. It should also be noted that even with increased social supports in place, there will always be a role for frontline policing, particularly when the safety of the public is put at risk. For example, ideally, police would not be the first agency responding to mental health distress calls. However, it's ultimately unrealistic to expect that when someone presents a danger to themselves or members of the public, that there wouldn't be a police response, preferably working in concert with trained mental health professionals. This is an approach that many police agencies have already adopted with the use of mobile crisis intervention teams that pair a trained mental health nurse with a police officer in order to rapidly address circumstances where it would be inappropriate for a uniquely police response. Police associations and frontline officers want to be constructive partners in this important discussion. In fact, nobody would agree more with the argument that police officers shouldn't be the only agency available to respond to calls that generally aren't criminal in nature. Associations also want to be part of the solution when it comes to addressing systemic racism in our sector. But we believe it's important for those solutions to be evidence-based and supported by rigorous research and evaluation, not be the result of misleading headlines and populist rhetoric. If we want to have a productive discussion around the future of police spending in Canada, it's important to focus on the entirety of the social safety system. If all that happens is a review or focus exclusively on policing, a lot of politicians, activists, and consultants might feel like they've accomplished something, but nothing will ultimately change. We need a more holistic or complete approach that engages all stakeholders, all three levels of government, and the public to ensure that Canadians can continue to have trust and confidence in their police services. As I've often said, police believe that proactive policing and building community relationships are a better approach to addressing social issues and the root causes of crime. However, community policing is a resource-intensive and requires a consistent, sustained approach. Community policing success hinges on an adequately funded and staffed police service where officers have proactive or uncommitted time during their shift to engage in day-to-day culturally aware interactions in priority neighborhoods. Budget cuts will weaken a police service's ability to engage proactively with the community and deliver community policing where it matters most in Canada's most vulnerable communities. So once again, I'd like to thank you again for the invitation to appear before you, and I look forward to questions.
Final witness is Chief McKee from Edmonton. 7 minutes, please.
Yes, and I'm going to turn off my video while I speak, hopefully for better audio. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair. I want to just first of all acknowledge it's a pleasure and a privilege to speak here with Peter and Tom representing our organization. I represent 1,900 sworn officers, approximately 900 civilians. I've been involved in the justice system for over 30 years as both a sworn police officer, deputy minister in government, co-chaired the Federal Provincial Deputy Ministers Committee, and co-chaired CCGS with StatsCan for over 4 years. I'm a proud member of the Métis community and have worked to change the way we police for the last 12 years. To complement Chief Slowly's remarks, I'm going to move from his suggestions and ideas around cultural change, which I support, and focus on operational changes to policing and the real crux of this matter, which is systemic change in policing and systemic change across the human service system that puts people in need of the services at the center of the needed change. This is not the first time this issue of systemic racism policing has been the focus discussion. The fact that we are gathered here again demonstrates that we must move beyond conversation into actionable, meaningful change that focuses on implementation and not more study. The facts are irrefutable. Systemic racism is real and exists within and all social institutions in Canada. This might make people feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. I'm hopeful the committee will take away from the panels held yesterday and again today the realization that we can no longer look at systemic racism and policing an isolated issue. As Justice St. Clair has commented, we need to move past the idea of being part of a systemically racist system means that you are racist. As Chief Slowly also indicated, that is not necessarily the case. Systemic racism is seen across the broad system of all social structures and institutions. There are many examples of this. We don't have to look very far. Residential schools still struggling in classrooms. COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionate impact on Black, Indigenous, and other racialized communities in Canada. Simply put, social conditions and context where people live determine such things as access, quality health care, which itself can protect, and exposed to certain illnesses and disease. This is too is systemic racism. Indigenous and other racialized communities overrepresent child welfare system, and I could go on. Yet, despite the evidence, we still can't seem to agree that systemic racism exists in this country. Even in policing, we have leaders who cannot see the impact of systemic racism, even though our history is marked by the role of policing to enforcing the Indian Act and discriminatory laws around the treatment of LGBTQ2S+ people, among others. Being fortunate to speak on these matters of reform around the world for probably the last 12 years, this is a time for leadership and courage demonstrate through commitment to change. This is not just a political matter. As chief, I know there's more work to be done within our organization and the broader environment in which we operate in. Nonetheless, I am encouraged knowing that I lead a team of dedicated frontline officers, the overwhelming majority who, while having no part in building the institution of policing or writing the rules, put on a uniform every day, each one committed to protecting and serving all the citizens with compassion and professionalism. It is much as for them as those we serve that we must hold individuals accountable who hold racist or inappropriate views accountable, that we must commit to that. But that by itself does not change the structure of the system, which, like other institution structures and system in this country, perpetuate racial inequality. What began as a protest against police brutality has evolved into a broader conversation on community safety and well-being linked to broader social and economic issues and disparity. So as a good friend of mine, Sheldon Kennedy, put, to know better is to do better. So now what? Let's start with police operations. And this change starts with leadership. Where should leadership put their focus to give us the best results? I like to focus on three key areas, though there were many others. First, our recruiting needs to show diversity and not just race, gender, or sexual orientation, gender identity, but also diversity in thinking and lived experience. Diverse recruiting changes culture and should never be taken lightly. It's a primary driver of change. So too is taking a close look at promotional and retention processes. Second is responding to calls, our bread and butter, as Tom and Peter have said. These are two things that drive our calls for service. Social issues related to mental health, addictions, poverty, and homelessness, which account for 80 to 92% of all calls for service. And then on the other side, addressing the serious offenders who are responsible for over 50% of recontact within the system. These must be responded to in different ways. A failure to do so can actually artificially increase crime rate and make the impacts of policing and community relations and perceived an impact on police legitimacy. Third, we need to address harassment, equity, diversity, and inclusion remain a priority for every police leader. To demonstrate our commitment in this area, EPS has moved this responsibility under the Office of Chief of Police. And finally, moving forward, it means looking at operational and organizational policies, procedures through a new lens. This includes partnerships and dialogue with community members, community agencies, academia, and other subject matter expertise to ensure our policies and procedures are grounded in evidence and supported by research. This means that we can do more on what works and get out of what doesn't. These are just some of the things we are doing at EPS and several others. Across Canada, cities and communities have developed strategies to address poverty, homelessness, housing, addictions, mental health. In creating these plans, we have to ask, who are we helping? Are these different people in these strategies, or most of them the same? And we all know the answer is it's mostly the same people. How much money is being spent on the social safety net in our cities? Is it coordinated? How can we improve our information sharing and pool our respective expertise to support coordination? How many death inquests will it take to be bold in making these changes? How do we measure success? By how many people are taken into the system, or how many we get out of the system? Are there minimum standards? We know the answer to that. As I mentioned, 80 to 92% of all calls of EPS are related to these key social issues. So with a coordinated strategy that incorporates both law enforcement and public health solution makes sense. Could that be the new structure? Are the social determinants of health not the same as the social determinants of justice? By pulling together the areas that drive the work rather than basing the structure on historical silos, we can begin to address systemic racism. While EPS is an organization of change, we recognize these efforts as us alone will not have the efforts or impact in any singular police agency. Time to put the collective expertise together, an effort truly address systemic racism that is intended to affect real and meaningful change within criminal justice, healthcare, child welfare, educational institutions, not-for-profits, working together to joint outcomes to get people out of the system. Policing will always be a vital public service, and that first contact will generally be held by police, will be one that we obviously have to get right. We're in a time right now, and just to end this and within my time frame, that we have the perfect storm to create change. The only way this change is going to be done is through partnership, data-led, local solutions, and collective outcomes. And it's time that we all look in the mirror and we drive for this change, and we're relentless to do it. It doesn't need everybody, but it needs a consortium of the willing to start the movement and gain the momentum that it truly needs in this country to move from a conversation to meaningful action. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chief McPhee. We're now moving to our 6-minute rounds, beginning with Mr. Paulus and Mr. Fergus and Madame Michaud, then Mr. Harris. For those of you who don't have headsets, if you could make a conscious effort to speak slowly so that the interpretation can keep up. So with that, Monsieur Paulus, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
Mr. Paulus, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to talk about causes. We're often talk about interventions or police intervention. Mr. McPhee, in a report, you mentioned that 80 to 92% of interventions dealt with mental health. So people were called, there were either drug addiction issues, alcohol addiction issues. One of the points raised about when legalization of marijuana was wrapped up, there was a police association that said there was a risk to the population. Did you see a difference after the legalization of marijuana? Is there more consumption, more issues with drugs? And did that lead to other drugs? And are there more police calls stemming from this, either Mr. Stamatakis or Mr. McPhee?
Jump in, but in terms of the percentages that Chief McPhee referred to, he's absolutely right. I mean, a vast majority of our calls are driven by issues related to mental health, addictions. The problem is that if the police weren't responding to many of those calls, they potentially can turn into more serious crimes, and that's been borne out by the research. In terms of your question related to cannabis, I mean, there's no question we continue to have issues related to cannabis. I would say from a frontline policing perspective, I wouldn't suggest, though, that because we're in a legal cannabis regime, we've seen a significant increase in demands with respect to enforcement related to that. And I would argue, and I'll let the Chief Slowly or Chief McPhee weigh in, but from a policing perspective, quite frankly, we're not prioritizing, personal consumption. First of all, we don't have the resources. Secondly, I think Canadians have been quite clear with respect to that issue.
Chief McPhee or Chief Slowly?
I have to apologize. I'm not getting the translation. I picked up parts of it, but one was on cannabis. What was the second part of the question?
Pierre, do you want to give the question?
Well,
my question was, since legalization of marijuana, has there been an increase in intoxication resulting in violence? And also, I would add, are there more issues in certain communities? And does that mean that police calls are facing mental health calls that become violent?
Marijuana. I apologize for my very, very weak French.
Chief McPhee, you're very faint for some reason or another.
Is that better?
Oh, that's better. Yes.
Yeah, I apologize first for my bad French, and I did pick up parts of it. So in relation to marijuana, I'll give you the Edmonton examples. We're not seeing a great impact with marijuana, bluntly honest. I mean, we still are seizing a large amount of marijuana in the mail. It's still an issue. So I don't think we're seeing a big change in there. There's not a real measurable impact on our crime rate either. So I think it's very much the same. We're seeing a much bigger impact with meth, which makes everything unpredictable, which kind of tells us we don't need a marijuana strategy or a fentanyl strategy. We need a people strategy, because people are using all of these drugs, and meth is one that's very unpredictable. In relation to mental health calls for service, we are seeing a significant increase. COVID-19 is also showing us a significant increase in suicide rate. So it is the perfect storm, as well as domestic violence is starting to upturn. So I think what we really have here is a bunch of the social determinants, as I've met, that are disproportionately driving police calls for service, which disproportionately make it a high-risk situation in many of these cases that come in as just troubled with persons or checks on welfare, as per se, that's used. The intoxication piece has increased, and the unpredictability has increased, which makes it very tough to not send a police officer to these calls. It really showing us that the response needs to be our PAC teams, police and mental health worker together, or now we're hiring social workers to have a police and social worker to try to respond as well. And once it's safe, the other agency takes the lead. And that's what I mean by partnership. So hopefully I've answered the majority of that question, and I apologize again for my translation.
Well, just before I ask Chief Slowly to enter into the conversation, if Chief McPhee, you put the little round button onto English, you should be getting a simultaneous translation, so that this shouldn't occur. So, anyways, Chief Slowly, Mr. Paulus has asked an important question, and I'm sure you wish to respond.
Merci beaucoup pour votre question.
Thank you very much for your question.
I'm going to revert this back specifically to systemic racism. I will admit my concerns around decriminalization of cannabis. It occurred while I was temporarily outside of policing in the private sector. I watched it from a very different lens, more as a father and as a community member, and my concerns around its impact. As I've come back into policing, I can assure you that there has not, at least in this jurisdiction in the nation's capital, been a significant increase in crime, violence on the street level that is associated to the decriminalization. There have been changes in consumption, which has affected driving practices. And that is not limited to any particular geography or demography. And the use of cannabis, as far as I know in the studies, cuts across almost every demographic group. So for me, it's a non-issue when it comes to the issue of systemic racism. What is important is the issue of decriminalization of simple possession. And certainly in my almost 3 decades in policing, and since I've come back into policing as a chief, I support fully the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police position on decriminalization for simple possession. It has, over the decades, disproportionately led to enforcement in marginalized and mostly racialized communities. It has, to Dale McPhee's and Tom's position, not resulted in meaningful changes in recidivism, and in fact has put more people, many with mental health and addictions issues, into the criminal justice system without sufficient off-ramps. It has significantly complicated and made more dangerous the work of frontline police officers. The old war on drugs strategy was a failure. I don't know if decriminalization will be as big a failure, but it'll be different. And I think, again, if we apply it in a broader integrated system approach with healthcare, social services, housing, and the not-for-profit sector, we're likely to get less people in the jail, more people healthy, less people on high addiction drugs, and those that are there will have the healthcare options on the street before they become a drain.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave this important conversation there, because Mr. Paulus is well past his 6 minutes. Mr. Fergus, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank all. I'd like to thank all the two police chiefs and Mr. Stamatakis for your presentations today. They were all very interesting. I'm going to perhaps focus my comments, my questions with Chief McPhee and Chief Slowly. First of all, Chief Slowly, thank you very much for your presentation. As far as I'm concerned, it almost writes the report. And I think you and Chief McPhee have complemented each other tremendously in terms of their testimony that you gave today. Perhaps I would, before I get into some issues, let me allow you to finish off that last point that you were making in response to my colleague, Mr. Paulus's question. Would it be something to consider if there were to be all the array of resources to be put together to combat dependency and mental health issues, that it might be worth considering the question of imitating Portugal, which decriminalized possession of all illicit materials, insofar as it is to get people into getting them off of that dependency and getting them the supports that they need?
That's a great question. I'm not an expert in this area, but I'll do my best to answer, sir. I've actually visited Portugal twice, major conferences around smart cities, actually, in my time in private sector. The integrated approach to creating a smart city underpins the integrated approach to a process of decriminalization. We have to invest, not de-invest in policing, in order to create the ability for the police services to work in the way that Dale has described in that systemic change, and that Tom referred to how we would work in and with community and priority neighborhoods. De-investing and simply transitioning the money will create another gap in the service delivery social safety net. The best places, like Portugal, for me, I've studied more Scotland, have actually maintained investments, but produced different service delivery models for the police while investing more in the other areas around policing to ensure that we have a smarter and more comprehensive approach to preventing these issues from becoming part of the justice system. When they are, from off-ramping these people out of the justice system and into the right areas of care and the right community supports. The other point I wanted to make was the decriminalization will actually, if applied in the same way we did with marijuana, and we provide clemency, you will give hundreds of thousands of Canadians, many of which are Indigenous and racialized and Black, the ability to get back into the job market, earn a wage for their family, and contribute to the tax base, which again in itself is an exponential financial accelerator for us, as well as being a justice accelerator.
I agree with you in terms of the clemency. A question for either chief in regard to some of the. First of all, let me just say right off the top that I really appreciate how you talked about giving policing a big rethink in terms of what ways can we talk about increasing community security and health. And that would require better partnerships, a different approach. When we had the RCMP commissioner here, she had testified saying that 7 in 1,000 calls that the RCMP officers get would be in a violent confrontation. Chief McPhee, you talked about 80 to 92% of the calls to the EPS deal with more social issues as opposed to public security issues. Is there a rethink going on in terms of then in what ways can police better respond to what actually turns out to be more of the run-of-the-mill calls that they get and interventions that you're asked to make?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's really the crux of what we're talking about, because let's face it, a lot of those calls come in, they're not really knowing what they're going to be. Like I tried to say in my opening statement, if it's meth related, sometimes obviously it's unpredictable, and a large part of this is drug or alcohol induced. So a partnership approach, and what we have in Edmonton and Ottawa and several police services, including Vancouver, where Tom has, have PAC teams, police and crisis workers in a police car going together. When you go together, you whoever, if it's a safe environment, then obviously the lead goes with either the social worker or the mental health worker. If it's not a safe environment, that the police stabilize that as well. We're looking at that now. How can we put mental health professionals in our dispatch center? How can we coordinate dispatch? If you think about it from a different context, the police services in this country almost run as many ambulances as EMS. So between police and EMS, we basically are police populate 100% of the justice system, and EMS and the police almost probably are 85% of the emergency rooms.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, just because I've been informed I only have a minute left, but Chief McPhee, if that's possible, you could even write that in a note if you do have the time, and send that to the clerk. We can always integrate into our report what we've received as written or as a verbal testimony. Very quickly, last question. We obviously have an issue where there is a systemic discrimination which exists. What can we do to stop when studies have shown that Blacks or Indigenous people or people of color are no more likely to commit a crime than any other group, all things being considered, what can we do then to stop over-policing in those areas? What type of approaches can we take so that we're not targeting them and therefore finding crime just because we're looking for it in those communities?
Again, an extremely important question, but Mr. Fergus is already way past his 6 minutes, and possibly we can work a response to his important question into other inquiries. With that, I'm going to ask Madame Michaud, 6 minutes. 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to ask my question to Mr. Slowly. Thank you for your testimony. In 2009, the OPS denied systemic racial profiling on road stop checks in particular. We see that skin color plays too large a role, and you committed to tabling an action plan on equity, diversity, and inclusion to stakeholders and improve experiences in the community. Is this action plan, was it implemented? I believe it was issued in January, and have you seen changes on the ground?
Yes. The EDI action plan was tabled in February in front of our board. It is an evergreen plan, meaning that we've taken what we believe are the top 10 most impactful activities that we can do to address overall equity, diversity, and inclusion. To be clear, that is both to ensure that within our police service, our members, all of our members, are treated with respect and dignity. They are able to work in a harassment-free environment, that we address systemic bullying, workplace mobbing, harassment, sexual harassment, and to provide a safe, healthy, and well environment for our members to then be psychologically, emotionally, and physically capable to go out and serve in a very diverse and pluralistic community. The EDI action plan, like almost everything in policing, got waylaid by this giant thing called COVID. But despite that, we have continued to make advancements against those top 10 priorities. We have significantly accomplished 3 of them, which includes creating the infrastructure like Dale McPhee talked about. We have created an EDI team and a respect, ethics, and values unit within my office, where directly they have access to the Office of Chief, the resources, the influence, and the power to address the equitable activities of our service to our members as well as to our community. This includes a strategy around anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, and systemic racism in the way that I described in my presentation, those 3 points being used by the Ontario Human Rights Commission in terms of addressing systemic issues within policing. A lot of work has been done in a short period of time despite other challenges, but we have a lot more work to do.
Merci. Et justement,
Thank you. And that third point, you talked about identifying and eliminating structural components that mean that systemic racism is perpetuated in your organizations. Do you think that the police officers on the ground are wearing too many hats at once? Are we asking too much of them?
That's part of the point I was making before, and I think it's been reflected by Tom and Dale. It is impossible for a human being in a uniform with a badge, a gun, and most importantly, an oath of office with brains and a heart and arms to wrap themselves around the vast diversity of human issues that we are being asked to go to on a 24/7, 365 basis in small, medium, and large communities across this great country. We have done too much of that for too long. It has created an unimaginable amount of stress and strain on our frontline officers. They suffer when they cannot save people, and they suffer when they're accused of not doing enough, the right things, or even the wrong things. And we've put them in a position of frustration and sometimes failure. And we need to do better for our frontline officers, and we need to do better for the communities that rely on them. They must be integrated into a wider set of service delivery opportunities that are available for community members on a 24/7, 365 basis. A question was asked earlier by MP Fergus that I'll quickly refer to. At the point of contact where the majority of the community calls the police, it's our communication centers. We have a 911 dispatch center, but we should have a 911 system, a 311 system, a 211 system, a 411 system, a 511 system. So right at the point we can properly assess the need for the call and the right services to go, where the police will always be an option. Quite often they will be dispatched in support of the social service worker or the mental health worker. But the immediate contact will be the right resources and not just the police resource. We have done a fantastic job in this country, and our frontline officers deserve praise and recognition, not condemnation. They need our support, not the defunding and the detasking. The integrating is what we actually need here.
Merci.
Thank you. And we were talking about integrating social workers. Instead of replacing police officers by social workers, I think they could work in teams. And when a call comes in, then people could assess if a police officer is needed in the field or not, or both. Are you in favor of that?
Oui, certainement. Exactement.
Absolutely, yes. Excellent. And what else do you propose concretely in order to improve the situation with systemic racism? You see what is going on with the report on your task force. What is the training about? Is it sufficient?
I'm gonna have to interrupt here. We're almost out of time, and I saw a consensus view from all three witnesses on your last question. So maybe we can leave it there. I am really having to run the clock here, and I apologize. Mr. Harris, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Let me first say that the reason this study is taking place is because it's recognized that there's significant systemic overrepresentation based on race of Indigenous, Black, and racialized Canadians in our criminal justice system, in prisons, and on the wrong end of the use of force by police, leading to serious injury or death. I think that's the reason we're here. And I first of all want to say that I hope that every police officer in Canada gets to hear what we heard from the first three witnesses, from our three witnesses, their opening statements. I think that puts to rest any question in my mind, and hopefully in their mind, that we're dealing with a problem that needs to be resolved. And I commend you for your recognition and for the quality of those statements. I think we need to find ways to put an end to what we are here for, and if we can do that, that would be great progress. First of all, to Chief Slowly, you were the Deputy Chief of Police of Toronto prior to Mark Saunders' appointment as Chief, and you had in place at that time a plan for modernization. You had developed a plan for the modernization of the Toronto police force. Could you tell us what that looked like?
Thank you, Mr. Harris. First of all, I want to be very clear. I was part of a team that was led by Bill Blair, now Minister of Public Safety. I was a deputy chief working for Bill. I contributed to the overall strategy that Bill was leading in that time frame. I applied for the chief's job in Toronto, and Mark was successful, and I fully support his leadership within the organization and his attempt to modernize the Toronto Police Service, which touched on many of the things that we've talked about here today. And some of the ideas that I've shared with you here were certainly part of the action items that the Toronto Police Service has led. Let me talk about the modernization plan here in the Ottawa Police Service, which very much reflects my lived experience as a Black man in Canada and my experience as a police leader in Canada, and my belief that policing does need to continue to modernize. Great strides have been made already by leaders whose shoulders I stand on, and I talked about Bill Blair, Adam Palmer in Vancouver, and Paul Pedersen here in Ottawa. At the core of it, though, is culture change. Taking the best of what we have, compassion, service, professionalism, dedication, bravery, but recognizing that many of the HR processes that we've used to nurture talent and maintain the health, emotional health and psychological health of our members over the course of a long 30-year career have not been sufficient. That we've seen members who have received moral wounds, some of which have gone on to PTSD, and in some tragic cases, suicide. And we need to do better for our members and their health. And we have seen systemic and decade over decade inability to significantly suppress crime in communities, as well as build resilience in communities where they can look after their own needs without depending on any institution, never mind the policing institution. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting new results but getting the same old results. We've done some great things. We've built a social fabric and a safety foundation in this country, but it's not enough. And a lot has changed and we need to do more. And that, I think, is a commitment you've heard from Tom and Dale and myself. And it reflects the vast majority of Canadian leaders and Canadian police officers. And we're willing to do it with different partners, healthcare, education, social services. But we need to come out of this emotional whirlwind and get into a place that we can plan and implement and evaluate those things properly.
Chief, some of the things that you've mentioned, and I'm not trying to be cynical here, but neighborhood policing, intelligence policing, has resulted in some communities of issues, complaints of racial profiling, carding, collecting information, leading to over-policing of the very groups we're talking about. How is what you're talking about now different? For example, one of the solutions, I suppose, proposed yesterday by Professor Owusu-Bempah talked about how police are rewarded for making the number of arrests and the results as opposed to perhaps a safe result. Are those things, is that something that is being changed? Is that part of the culture change? How do we go from this point where over-policing actually happens because of this culture to the point where we don't have this?
Again, I want to very quickly reference my comments around neighborhood policing were clear. Prevention should be the first thing that we do. Off-ramping people out of the justice system, not on-ramping them into the justice system, is what the first thing our neighborhood officers should do. And each one of the speakers talked about it in a very different way, but in the same way. If you send officers into any place and tell them that their most important tool is law enforcement, if you require of them to do law enforcement in order to get promotions or transfers, they will do those things. That's where the systemic issue comes in. Our officers themselves, through our own systems that we have designed and put them in, have put them in a bad place and communities in a bad place. We need to better task our officers, better provide opportunities for different outcomes than just law enforcement outcomes. We actually need to stop calling our officers law enforcers. They are servers, they are protectors, but they shouldn't be referred to as law enforcers. They should be working in service with other agencies to prevent crimes, and if crimes do happen, to try to off-ramp those from the criminal justice system as much as possible to reduce the demand in the system.
Mr. Harris, we're going to have to leave it there. Colleagues, I have a hard stop at 1:20 because the requirements are that the room be emptied and for COVID purposes and scrubbed and all the rest of the stuff. So I'm going to be a bit arbitrary and cut 3 minutes down to 2, and I'm unfortunately going to have to cut off both Madame Michaud and Mr. Harris for their last 2 questions. So it will be Mr. Morrison for 2 minutes and Mr. Haines-Sanger 2 minutes, Mr. Vidal 2 minutes, and Madame Demoff for 2 minutes. So apologize for being arbitrary, but we have COVID protocols that have to be adhered to. So with that, Mr. Morrison, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank both the chiefs and Tom Stamatakis for coming today. First of all, my question will be for you, Tom, but I just want to thank you for representing the frontline police officers. I know many times they feel alone out there with very little support, especially in our remote communities. My question, Tom, is in relation to our public mental health and how our police officers, and especially in remote communities, have to do so many tasks. And I know you gave a media release to the global news. I just wonder, municipally is a bit different than rural. I just wonder if you can quickly give us some insight on what you feel we should be doing here.
Thank you. I think Chief Slowly said it very well. We put police officers, men and women, in these untenable situations where we ask them to do too much, and it's particularly a challenge in our more rural and remote parts of the country where there is no access to service and support. And back to one of the questions in terms of over policing, particularly in our Indigenous communities or more vulnerable, marginalized communities, it is about creating that capacity, which has been touched on by both Chief Slowly and Chief McPhee, around those other services, those partnerships. And when you put a police officer in a remote or rural community on their own with no access to those other services, it not only creates the kind of situation that Chief Slowly touched on in terms of moral injury and frustration around the inability to actually help people, which then leads to the damage that Chief Slowly so very eloquently described. And we need to do more. We need to build that capacity. We need to look beyond just policing to do the things that have been discussed this afternoon by all the panelists. And if we don't do those things, nothing will change. I've been part of so many reviews and coroner's inquests and commissions of inquiry. We need to change what we're doing if we want to address these issues, including the mental health and wellness of the men and women we ask to do this challenging work in often very difficult circumstances.
Okay, I'm going to have to leave it there, Mr. Morrison. I'm sorry for that. Mr. Anand-Sangri, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the panel for being here. And I will focus my comments on Chief Slowly. As you know, Chief, I was one of many people who really wanted you to be chief in Toronto, and I just want to put that on the record because of your phenomenal leadership capabilities. You've been in the police service for over 30 years, and you're one of the very few at that time Black men to be part of the police service in Toronto, and you've risen through the ranks. What challenges do you think that exist today that you had to overcome, that if you were, if you're leading a service that you would change? Because I think the things that I hear from many frontline officers, especially racialized officers, is that there are many, many obstacles for growth and for retention. So can you just maybe highlight the top 3 challenges that you think could change policing, especially with respect to recruitment and retention?
In less than a minute, unfortunately.
Well, you referenced recruitment and retention. I think we're actually doing an amazing job of recruiting. It's our coach officer programs. And again, I don't put this on the coach officers. We haven't enabled that first line of cultural change, which is the actual coach officer program, to be as sophisticated and robust enough to really maintain the vitality of the quality and diversity of what we're bringing in. But the quantity of that is increased. The second area is leadership. And we have not, as a leadership group, including myself, have not been able to make the case for change. We have not been able to articulate the issues like systemic racism and individual bias, and we need to do a much better job of educating ourselves and therefore enabling ourselves. And the last point is we have to stop fighting within each other, the front line against management, management against the associations. In fact, we've had a great relationship with leaders like Tom Stamatakis. We have had a misrepresentation of the relationship between frontline and management and unions in the media. And we need to stop being divided and conquered, and we need to be far more united in our approach. And I think those are 3 big areas that will advance this issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Vidal, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to get right to my question because obviously we're working in some tight time frames, and it's for Chief McPhee. Mr. McPhee, you come from northern Saskatchewan, which is my stomping grounds as well. In your time as the Chief of Police of Prince Albert, you instituted a very proactive, inclusive approach to community policing, which was referred to as the Hub back then, and moved on in your time as the Deputy Minister of Corrections and Public Safety in Saskatchewan to kind of move that across the province. I would love for you to just talk about some of the successes and the positive results you got out of instituting that proactive policing and care model.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. And there's 155 of them in Canada and the US right now. I was just on the phone yesterday with Baltimore PD looking at launching one in Baltimore. What it really is in a nutshell, try to do quick so we have more time, is it's exactly what we're talking about, what MP Michaud talked about, is put all the service providers in, put the person in the problem in the equation, and stop worrying about who owns it and just get the solution to get the people some help. And you're aware that most of the government right now measures what they take in. Nobody measures what they get out of the system. And the reality is that police are over responding to most of this because it's one of the 24/7, 365 things that are available. Now, that said, is just because you respond doesn't mean you should own. We need to use that collective voice, the collective wisdom, the data, the expertise to get it to the right service connected. And back what I was saying, because police control 100% of intake in the justice system, doesn't mean that everything should go in the justice system. It's time to change the structure. We're operating in silos called ministries of health, social services, education for too long. Think of any business. If you ran it for the last 75 years under the same structure, would it be in business today? Probably not. The data now has given us the ability to do things better. To Tom and to Peter's point, is use that first contact to be meaningful, to get people help. There's still the justice system for the serious people, and they need to be in the justice system. But when it's the vulnerable people, it's a collective response that's needed. It's putting all the agencies, including the not-for-profits, together to do it. And just one little bit, I'll leave you with that. Do the math on how much money is spent on all those things together. It'll absolutely, when I was in my job, I started to do that through the CRA. It's huge.
I can't apologize for being the guy who seems to have the axe around here. Finally, Madame Demoff, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are for the chiefs, and you may not have time to both respond, but you've both said that the police shouldn't be responding to the number of mental health calls that you have. I know Chief Nish, I saw him from Peel speak about 82% of their calls are mental health or addiction related, and I recently read the RCMP said over 60% of their calls during COVID have been mental health. I don't know that police are the right ones to necessarily be responding, and I know there's an argument to be made for that. But if you look at institutions where people who have addictions and mental health issues are put, it's staff that respond, not police. If you look at long-term care, people with Alzheimer's, there's violence that occurs there. I'm just wondering if, and there's great models, Chief McPhee, I've heard about your hub model. Can you speak to whether or not we couldn't be training people to be responding to some of these calls so we're actually not sending police to these mental health and addiction calls?
I think you're onto the crux there, MP Damoff. I think it's a little bit broader than that. It has to be safe first. So responding collectively together will give you that solution, and eventually in time, hopefully you can design a better system. But the reality is it should be a screening in the dispatch center first with a professional mental health worker to actually make the right assessment on the call to try to get as much information in today's day and age to send the right response. And that's what I meant. If you had police and EMS within the same area and you had a better service provider, including the not-for-profits, you would absolutely reduce this by 20 or 30% overnight.
So sorry to interrupt because I only have 15 seconds, but are you saying that you could actually be determining who needs to be dispatched and then sending them out to the call?
Absolutely. Okay. I mean, we're in a day and age of AI and everything else, and we're not using it collectively.
Federal government controls the standards for next generation 911. You can actually build that standard so every police agency in every part of the country has to be able to have that triage capability in next generation 911. That's a federal responsibility that can trickle down into every single jurisdiction.
Thank you.
That's very useful. Thank you, Madame Damop. One more just extraordinary panel in this study. I want to thank the witnesses for your contribution. It's very encouraging as a citizen of this country to hear such a profound articulation of the issues that face policing in our country, and it's a great contribution to our study. So I want to thank you for that. Before I ask for the adjournment, I want to remember our members need to know that if they don't get the password, please contact the clerk, email the clerk, because it's a new number to get into the call and new password. So that'll all be sent to you. I hope it's all sent to you, but apparently some of you have not been getting it. With that, we're adjourned. Again, thank you, witnesses.
Thank you.